All right, welcome, Jim. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks for having me.
For sure. So basically what we're going to do is kind of interview you on kind of your history, what got you into kind of what you do, and more importantly, I'm kind of curious on the books you've written.
Okay.
So, but for those of you who don't know, because your audience is slightly different than my audience. Mm-hmm. So as far as introduction, I copied and pasted what you have on your website.
Perfect.
And it says, James A. Hessler is a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg National Military Park. His 2009 book, Sickles at Gettysburg, was awarded the R.E. Lee Civil War Roundtable's Batchelder Coddington's Award and the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable's Distinguished Book Award as the most outstanding work on the Gettysburg Campaign. Jim has been a guest on NPR, the Travel Channel, PCN TV, Breitbart News, and Civil War Radio, and he has written multiple books, spoke at multiple Civil War roundtables, taught courses for Gettysburg Foundation, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Community College, and most importantly, is a co-host of the Battle of Gettysburg podcast.
Thank you. I would say not most importantly, but but I'm serious. Yeah, so that's a part of it. You know, I think licensed battlefield guide first, author second, podcaster third is how I think of it.
Yeah, for sure.
You know? And I will point out that's an old bio, folks. We have 3 more books. We'll get to the
100%. Yeah, exactly.
Here, but
so
not that I would ever come on and plug books.
Well, that's the whole reason, right?
Right.
No, so I want to say I'm excited to talk to you. And we actually talked about this during lunch, but how I came to get to know you or your work is from a Custer standpoint, more of a Western Indian Wars and even a little bit of Civil War, but I thought you were more of a Cavalry Custer fan. Right. And then when I found out that you were obviously well-versed in everything else, that kind of surprised me. But it seems like other people kind of flip-flop a little bit. So how would you say you're known, and is that an accurate statement of who you are?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think primarily known for Gettysburg specific topics, and because my first book was Sickles at Gettysburg on Dan Sickles, I think to people, and we talked about typecasting at lunch,
right.
I am a little bit typecast as that Sickles guy. And you know, it's funny, that book came out in 2009, and so it's done very well. It's still in print 15 years later, but at the time, I was kind of like, okay, I don't want to be known as the Sickles guy. I got to do other stuff. Right. But then, 15 years go by, and maybe being known as the Sickles guy isn't so bad. So you kind of ride a little bit of a wave with it. But I think Gettysburg first, and then he's the Sickles guy. Right. That kind of comes in. Custer, on the other hand, was really, as a child, my first historical interest. And so anytime I can come, where I have not yet written a book on that, but anytime I can come back to that through a podcast or giving a battlefield tour or whatever, I'm always happy to do that. So there is the niche that knows me for that.
Yes.
But I think primarily Gettysburg.
Okay. So before, we're kind of rewind a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's, those of you who actually listen to you and are fans of you, you may, or those audience members may have already heard some of this stuff, but go to your childhood, go to kind of how you grew up, and which kind of you mentioned a little bit, and how did you get into the world of history, especially the Civil War?
Yeah, I'll skip a lot of the childhood. Yeah. I think just in general, I grew up in a house where education was important, and I would not say I had historian parents or siblings, but there was always an awareness of that. We would watch history-based things on TV, and the World at War, and the Alamo, and just things that were history-based. They Died with Their Boots On was always a family staple whenever that showed up in late-night TV. So there was always a bent, but we were not what I would call a history family. When I went to school, my background is business and finance, and where I cut my teeth professionally for 30 years was in banking and financial services. But like many of us get started, we realize those corporate, dead-end corporate sort of, my God, I'm selling my soul to the devil kind of careers.
Right.
They don't really sustain us, so we get interested in history. Yeah. And so I started as an avocation, as a passion, and just reading. Early 90s, my then future mother-in-law gave me a copy of The Killer Angels.
Oh, of course,
and,
right? Yeah.
And I should back up. I'd always been reading about Custer, so I should back up. I'd always been reading about Custer and the Little Bighorn, but early 90s, my future mother-in-law gave me a copy of The Killer Angels, and then that sort of set me on the Gettysburg sphere. The thing is, reading about Custer, Little Bighorn, the Indian Wars, Western expansion, whatever you want to call it, you realize how many of these guys cut their teeth in some way, shape, or form about the Civil War.
Exactly.
And so, more and more, I'd read about a Hancock or, Sherman, Sheridan, and I'd become more curious, what did these guys do in the Civil War? And so I went to the Civil War through a back door. People assume because I'm a professional Civil War historian today that I started there first, but in this case, that's not the case.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess then, go a little bit further then, what got you into, I mean, in a way, kind of into Gettysburg themselves, and what really made you become a licensed battlefield guide?
Sure.
Because there's a difference between being interested in history and, research. Even like for myself, I go to the National Archives, do a lot of research, but it's never been in my head to test for being a licensed battlefield guide. So where does that jump from?
Well,
where does that come from?
As much as I think you have all the makings to be a successful licensed battlefield guide, taking a part-time job in Pennsylvania while you live in Wyoming is not something I would recommend.
Probably not.
The commute and the gas mileage might get eaten up fast. What was the question? No. So the Killer Angels was sort of my gateway to Gettysburg, as it is for many people. This was early 90s, which sounds like kind of a lightweight thing to say until you realize, hey, wait a minute, that was 35 years ago. At that time, the movie Gettysburg was also coming out. And so sort of read and saw the movie for the first time kind of hand in hand.
Right.
That sparked the Gettysburg interest. I probably made my first visit to Gettysburg around 1996. And, as any good historian will tell you, right? Reading books is great. Movies are great. Podcasts are great. But when you get on the ground, see the historic site is when it comes together. And Gettysburg was a perfect example of that. So we started coming to Gettysburg more and more through the mid to late 90s. Y2K, year 2000, I was going through a job transfer, and my wife said, why don't we buy a house in Gettysburg? And honey, sold, right?
Wow.
That kind of idea. So we moved to Gettysburg, and again, as much as you love the battlefield, going around the battlefield, there's only so many times you can stand on a little round top and go, this is great, great sunset sort of thing. There were these guys and ladies going around the battlefield as licensed battlefield guides, and I said, wow, you can make a little extra money. You could get paid to talk about the Battle of Gettysburg. People will pay you to talk about this, and so that was kind of when I said. And I think particularly after one bad day at the day job one night, I came home, slammed my briefcase down on the table, said, honey, I'm studying for that exam, and one thing led to the other, and I was lucky enough to make the cut.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I got to ask then as a follow-up, describe the test. How hard was it? And describe the test and what you thought of it, and whether how hard do you really have to study?
Okay. Boy, how many hours do we have? All right, boil another pot of coffee, viewers. We're gonna go into hour 3 here. So when I took the test in 2002, and it was the first time I had taken the test, I had by that point, I'd been a Gettysburg enthusiast for a decade, but realizing around 2000, 2001, I wanted to take this exam, I'd kind of immersed myself into it for maybe 2 years. Immersion being, all the Custer Little Bighorn books get packed away, no Antietam, I'm doing Gettysburg for two years. Reading Coddington, which at that time was still the Bible.
Yeah.
And if you could master Coddington, the secrets of the universe would unlock. Kind of thing. So it was studying, immersing yourself in Gettysburg. The thing I will say, though, and particularly to any prospective battlefield guide candidates out there, I am astonished at the number of people who train for this job or sit for this exam and have never hired a licensed battlefield guide and have never taken a tour with a licensed battlefield guide.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm astonished is, how can you say you want to do this job and be prepared to train for the job if you have no idea what the job is?
That's a great point.
Because these, I'm going to come and I'm just going to give staff rides and I'm not going to deal with the general public. You have no idea, what that's like. So I felt, because I had hired guides and taken all different manners of tours, get an idea, what do people ask you when you were on the field? What are you expected to talk about? And I felt like I had a good grounding on that, so it was good grounding, good reading, and sometimes you're just a good test taker.
Yeah.
And all the training, I liken it to Major League Baseball sometimes. All the training and the practice in the world isn't going to do you any good if when you step up to the plate, if you can't hit that fastball. Right? So you get up to the plate and it's all on you, and that's how you prep. So let's talk about the exam.
Yes.
So 100% clarity. When I took the exam, when are we doing this? 23 years ago? So when I took the exam 23 years ago, it is, by all accounts, different than the exam they give today. Now, prospective candidates out there are like, oh yeah, I hear it's a lot harder today. No. It was not easy back then. But back then, we did not have all these internet resources that are available to candidates today.
Right.
Stone Sentinels, YouTube, Facebook Live videos, the American Battlefield Trust. If you wanted to, I'm doing this in the dawn of the 21st century. If you wanted to know something, you had to either look it up in your favorite book or get out on the battlefield and look it up. You couldn't, and find the answer for you. So today it's I think when I see some of the test questions today, there are areas where maybe they go a little bit more into the weeds today, but as far as I'm concerned, you have to, because the level of available source material is different.
Yeah.
So again, it's quantitative, fill in the blank, essays, and then we'll get to the whole oral exam, which comes after that. The thing is, I talked about in the first part of this answer that get a good grounding on what you think a tour guide, battlefield guide does. And what kind of questions people ask. But the other piece of that, which I think often throws people off the rails a little bit, is other battles, general Civil War history, non-Gettysburg questions. There's going to be an assumption going in that you have studied your favorite Gettysburg books meticulously, but if you don't know when Shiloh occurred or what state Antietam was, the Battle of Antietam was, they're gonna throw you that way. Last but not least, longest answer in history, folks. Last but not least, and I'm almost gonna kind of.
Oh, you're good. That's great.
General park history, Park Service history, history of the monuments. It's all fair game.
Right.
It's all fair game before you even get to the oral exam.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna pause for a breath there.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot.
That's a lot. So that's the written.
That was a lot to unpack, as we like to say on the Battle of Gettysburg podcast.
Let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's unpack this. Okay, should we go to the oral exam now?
Let's talk about the oral exam.
Well, now they have an interim step, which they did not have back in my day, but they have a couple interim steps where basically a panel interview. And the idea is, okay, you've demonstrated via the written exam, top 20, top 25, however many people they take. You've demonstrated via a written exam, do you have the ability to engage, communicate, and talk to people? So there's a panel interview, which again, we did not have in my day, they have today. That might weed a few candidates out. And then, well, what are they calling charm school these days? I don't even, the whatever they call it. You basically go to like a training school for a weekend. And again, guides and mentors will try to help steer you through that.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, finally, we're at the oral exam. All right, so you've made it through all of that, and the oral exam, tier, whatever it's called today, but it's an oral exam where you get in the car with our ranger supervisor and another person, usually another guide, and they play the role of tourist, visitor, passengers. You give them the tour. And so the key is here, you've got to engage for 2 hours, you've got to finish in 2 hours, because for generations, 2 hours was the traditional car tour.
Right.
And yes, folks, that's got to include Culp's Hill, which, adds onto the tour loop. So if you can do that, if you can get through all those steps, give that practice run, do it in 2 hours, engage the two people who are in the car with you, then, folks, you join the lucrative world of Gettysburg licensed battlefield.
Well, we were talking about how lucrative it was at lunch.
Yes. So it's exactly.
Or not.
Don't give up your day job.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Don't give up.
Exactly.
It is a for the love of the game kind of thing. Don't get me wrong, there are many people who try to do it full-time, some of them living on pensions, and that makes it a lot easier. But it is, it's not substantial employment from a financial perspective. So
I guess one last question on the whole testing process, or then becoming a licensed battlefield guide. How close does the questions that you study and test on match what realistically are all the questions that you get from the public? Now, there's actually we're gonna go on to
we're squirming uncomfortably in the chair at this point. Yeah.
Well, we're going to get to your favorite myths and things you hate about.
It's hot in the studio right now.
So before we get to the actually giving tours and then dealing with the public, how much do you? I train for. I teach and train for a profession on my real job, and you get to a point where you're teaching this subject. And for now, I've been teaching one subject for 20 years.
Yeah.
And you know what questions are going to be asked. You know 99% of the time how the thing is going to work. Yeah. So how much what you studied matches what you actually get asked.
Yeah. Fortunately, I have my attorney in the studio behind the camera right now. For the let me go into a mountain of disclaimers before I answer that question. As of 2025, Jim is not involved in formulating that exam in any way, shape, or form. So disclaimer number 2 would be Jim at this point is only speaking for Jim and is not speaking on behalf of the guides, the Park Service, or anyone
duly noted.
Besides myself, duly noted.
Yes.
So, again, those colleagues who are watching right now and do volunteer for that process are going to start shouting at the camera. Right. So that would be disclaimer number 3 or whatever we're up to. So anyways, the idea is depth of knowledge.
Yes.
And making sure you have that depth of knowledge on the Civil War. Are there questions that we've seen on recent exams that, for me personally, in 25 years of guiding, I have never been asked? Yes. Yeah. There are those. Who's the Department of the Interior? Nobody comes to Gettysburg and asks that question. Again, that's a demonstration by the Park Service that they want to make sure you understand the background of the organization that you are contracting with. Yeah, so you are unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, going to be thrown a few questions that I promise you nobody will ever likely ask you on a tour. But somebody watching right now will say, "We need to, Jim, depth of knowledge." I get it.
Totally. I mean, it goes like anything else. You want to be able to, when you're testing these people to be licensed guys, you want them to know the depth of what you want them to know. Because we all know, especially even without being a licensed battlefield guide, just being a historian, that the level that the public knows and the level of questions that the public are going to ask, honestly, are going to be pretty shallow. But you're going to, I guess, be prepared for those individuals who do know.
Well, and I'm glad you bring that up. We touched on that a little bit at lunch as far as specialty topics or specialty tours. And we touched on that. You're right. For most guides, a vast majority of what they're going to do is going to be general public. The family is passing through Gettysburg on the way to Washington, on the way to Hershey Park. The school group is coming through on the bus. Very general history. Blue versus gray, show them cannons, talk a little bit about monuments, let them climb towers, things like that. But there are, and you're one of them, we talked about some of the experiences you've had, wink, wink, at Gettysburg at lunch. Folks, if you were at lunch, if you know, kind of thing. We do specialty topics. Guides, we all have things. Many of us have things we specialize in, and we have specialty topics. I do not want anyone watching this to think all the guides will do is a very general overview. And that's part of the gig, is adaptability. If you know nothing about the Civil War and you're just passing through, a general, not too deep in the weeds tour. If, let's say, for example, you wanted an all-day cavalry tour.
Just saying.
Hypothetically, wink, wink. Hypothetically, but you want a guide who can do cavalry all day as a specialty. And we're out there, but we want to place you with that person. So it's in the weeds, it's not in the weeds, just depending on who
that makes sense
here, right?
For sure.
For
sure. So I want to move on to like more of like your the books you've authored and stuff like that. But anything else you want to add on just your experience with the test, becoming a tour guide, and I guess anything of note being a tour guide?
I think as a licensed battlefield guide, I've done it part-time. I've done it part-time for 25 years. It is the greatest part-time job in the world. As we said in the earlier question, there are colleagues who do it full-time. They can speak for themselves whether it's a great full-time job or not. It is physically demanding, and we talked a little bit about this at lunch. So people listening at home who want to do this should appreciate the realities of this as a physical job.
Yeah.
Getting in and out of cars, on your feet all day, talking all day, answering questions all day, in the sun, in the wind, in the rain, ticks, the whole 9 yards. It is not you coming to the battlefield, in a sport coat with your patches on the elbows and your pipe, giving a dissertation on the Civil War to audiences who are just fascinated by what you have to say. A colleague, I'll give Rich Core a shout out, when I was in training, a colleague said to me, they're here to see the battlefield, not you. And I would challenge everybody to always remember that.
Yes.
The battlefield is the star of the show. The Battle of Gettysburg is the star of the show. We are just the people keeping it alive and telling that story. And people who want to get into this work should remember that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, cool.
Let's get into your books.
Yes.
All right. So, like I said, ironically, I knew you more on the Custer side of things, but as far as the first book that I actually read of yours was the Sickles book.
Yeah.
Now, what's funny is I was put on to the Sickles book, which I didn't even put the two and two together, right? Of like, you wrote that book, you were
listening to my podcast.
Oh yeah, I was like going over,
which is amazing because I only mentioned that book like 15 times.
I know, right? Exactly.
Hey,
so, but actually, I came up it was the park ranger. On YouTube, Stuff Writer.
Oh, Ranger
Matt Atkinson, right?
Yes.
So because Matt Atkinson has multiple videos on making fun of Uncle Dan and all this kind of stuff, and based on his dynamic personality, it got me interested in looking at Sickles, and then your book popped up, and one of your episodes you mentioned it, and I'm like, oh.
Same guy.
I'll definitely do that. And then when I compared that, I'm leading up to a question here, but when I compare that to what I knew you like Custer as well, I have to be honest, no judgment here, but I kind of judged you as a guy who, why would you seem to be enthralled with the anti-heroes. The people that other people hate, right? They love that. I mean, people love to hate on Custer.
Yep.
People love to hate on Sickles.
Yep.
So even though you have so much more work out there than just the Sickles book, but there's definitely a trend there. Would you like to expound on why those individuals?
Yeah, again, I'd be happy to. And my wife says exactly the same thing. She really does. She says the same thing. Why? And other people have said that too. So I'll come back to Sickles in a minute. Understanding that, again, that Custer, Little Bighorn, Battle of Little Bighorn specifically was really the first history topic that I was into. And it wasn't at that time, I was a kid, 70s, 80s, I won't date myself, but somewhere between, the end of World War II and the fall of the Berlin Wall, I'm a kid getting interested in this stuff. And it was really the mystery of the Battle of Little Bighorn. No survivors, cowboys and Indians. That you had kind of this interesting personality, George Armstrong Custer, at the center of it. So at the time, I wasn't so much into that, the anti-hero aspect, until I became older and you realized, okay, there's this whole body of literature that does not like George Armstrong Custer. And then it kind of becomes a case of, well, wait a minute, Custer portrayed as the homicidal megalomaniac as he so often is. That's not the guy I've been reading about my whole life. No, there should always be a balance. So there was an idea with we should be getting the truth out on this guy. And it doesn't mean the truth is all good, but my God, some of the stuff you see attributed to this guy is not true either. So, if there's a slant on the Custer anti-hero side, it would be that.
Yeah.
Sickles now, so now fast forward, It's early 21st century. Like I keep coming back to that. It's early 21st century. I've just started as a battlefield guide. I really did not have any particular slant or background on Sickles. People will assume, oh, were you a Sickles fan since you were a kid?
Right.
No, not at all. But when I became a battlefield guide, I found I enjoyed telling Sickles stories. You know, because you have the underhandedness, the devious.
There's a lot there.
There's a lot to unpack there. The scoundrel, the murder, the adultery. Oh yeah, and disobeying orders at the Battle of Gettysburg. I found that I enjoyed talking about that stuff. B, if you had the person in the audience who is not the hardcore Gettysburg person and is kind of just, sitting there like this for the whole tour, you start talking about Sickles murdering his wife's boyfriend, and ooh, they perk up in the back seat, and they want to hear more about that, and here's a picture of him, and all that stuff. So I found that was a good way to engage people who may not be as interested in the Battle of Gettysburg. From my taking, I read the Sickles books that were out there at that time, and although they all had good things, they weren't the Sickles book I wanted to write.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to read, so I kind of just started collecting Sickles info, and then finally said, oh, Christ, I got so much stuff here, I might as well write it down.
Yeah.
And that became Sickles at Gettysburg, the book.
That's
so
right.
yeah, and that's why. So anti-heroes is a general statement. My God, they're more fascinating than talking about Marble Men. And, for me, because what I've dealt with a lot in the Civil War community, maybe not as much now because I have done some other stuff, but what I've deal with a lot in the community is, hey, Sickles guy, I mean, you hate George Meade and all that stuff. But no, not at all. But to me, trying to dissect somebody that people don't like historically is frankly a lot more interesting, a lot more challenging than, I'm sorry, but George Meade was the most overlooked general of the Civil. Folks, to me, that story's played out.
Right.
It's a cliche. Everybody's been saying it for the past 40 years. Dissecting Dan Sickles, to me, is a lot harder job than rehabilitating Meade or rehabilitating Longstreet, which, my God, everybody is doing these days. So there's that aspect as well. I guess getting your teeth, getting off a little bit on diving into guys that people don't like.
Yeah,
There's a little bit of that.
sure. All right, so moving on to your other books. Like I said, how many? We were talking about that. How many publications do you have overall?
So in terms of books, I just a few weeks ago at the time of this recording, I just released my fourth book.
Okay.
Sickles at Gettysburg was the first book, 2009. 2013, Wayne Motz and I did Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg, and you've met Wayne earlier today, so again, folks, if you know, you know. But Wayne is here on the trip with us. So Wayne and I did Pickett's Charge at Gettysburg in 2013. Britt Eisenberg and I then did Gettysburg's Peach Orchard, I think about 5 years or so after that, which in some ways is a sequel to the Sickles book. Last but not least, 2025, I released by myself solo, First Day at Gettysburg, which is part of Casemate's new illustrated campaign series. So
Gotcha.
4 books, really running the gamut. First day, third day, got them all, folks.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So which one would you think you're I guess, the proudest of?
I think the Sickles book, because it was the first, because, I had not cut my teeth on any of this before, because I did it solo.
Right.
It is easier when you're working with somebody else. And I think, Sickles, sales-wise and in terms of notoriety, 15 years later, the Sickles book is still standing the test.
Yeah. People still want to read about them.
Yeah, they do. We still sell it, which tells you people still want to read about it. The other books are all great. It's like which one of your kids is your favorite.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Right.
We got one of yours in the room. Which one?
Yeah, I know, right?
Pick it, kind of thing. But they're like your kids. You love them all in different ways. But I think your first one is the one you remember.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah.
All right. So as far as researching the books, what have you learned about what it takes to research a book? And maybe, I guess, from my perspective, I can never figure out when to cut it. Stop doing research. Just say what I have is what I have. So go through the process of researching, and then did you have a hard time stopping and just writing what you have, or did you find yourself trying to keep going down every rabbit hole you can to try to find more in that next piece of information?
Yeah, you know, there's some questions in there that people ask me all the time, so it's interesting that you mentioned that. You know, if you're on the continuum, you know, Sickles' book comes out in 2009, so I'm researching writing that in 2004, 2005. You know, compare that now to 2025, 20 years later, when we're doing this. Obviously, you know from your work with the Research Arsenal, you know, things are just increasingly becoming digitized.
Yes.
When I was doing the Sickles book, that was starting. You know, newspaper.com was a thing, but it wasn't as prolific as it is today. And so, you know, one of the things I felt like I was really scoring with at the Sickles book was getting all these brand new newspapers that were being digitized. And of course, now what was digitized in 2004 is only a fraction of 2025.
Right, exactly.
Right? So the digitization obviously is a thing. You know, we have a benefit because I live in Gettysburg, work in Gettysburg. You know, if you're writing a book on Gettysburg, you should be starting with the park archives at Gettysburg National Military Park, and so close to home and easy, at the time at least, easy to access. So, you know, you learn that, you accumulate stuff over the years. Things you accumulate over the years help you then in future books. You know, somebody gives you an anecdote about Pickett's Charge. File that in my cabinet. Right. And then 5 years later, you're writing a Pickett's Charge book and you're looking in your cabinet for that account. So you have that. I am a baby. I am a novice. I am a girly man when it comes to the National Archives. There's still like guys like you and Bob, our friend Bob O'Neill, and Wayne.
That's what he does.
Yeah. O'Neill and Motts are down at the archives all the time. And you know, the good thing is when you have friends, you can say, "Hey, Bob, while you're down there, can you look this up?" And so you can get a familiarity with it that way. But you know, the digitization of it, it's just such a different landscape.
It is.
You know, not going to libraries all over the country. You know, I hear they have 1880s copies of this newspaper. I got to drive 8 hours to this library. You know, you don't have to do that anymore. And it is a different landscape.
Well,
there,
actually,
which, you know.
Yeah, so I was going to say that follow-up question to that is then from what you've seen, because you know you do have some years on you, Mr. Pre-Berlin Wall here. How has the electronic access or digitization of records, how has that changed the landscape of Civil War history? And I guess what I mean by that is, of course, it's easier access, more available, and we get that, but like anything else, there always seems to be good and bad.
Yeah, right.
Is there anything, quote, bad about the digitization, or how would you say the culture has changed, and has it gone? Is there anything bad about it?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, not meaning to insult or offend anybody who's listening, but you know, you want to be careful that it doesn't become anyone can do it.
Yeah.
Right? All you got to do is log on to newspaper.com, pull, you know, keyword search Gettysburg, get 100 of them, put them into a Gettysburg book, you know, a Gettysburg book that has no context or you know, and then I'll annotate and anecdote it, but I don't know anything about the Battle of Gettysburg, so my annotations are wrong.
Exactly.
You know, so that's the danger of it.
Well, actually, so you just saying that just sparked the thought in my head how, like, social media or the internet in general has made it easier for people to publish books, like Amazon, right? Ebooks or whatever. Yeah. And you just then, I guess, reminded me or made me realize research could be the same way now.
Yes.
As the people who shouldn't be writing books now write books for ebooks, whatever, right? Available on Amazon. And then now, you know, maybe people who need to put a little bit more work into research say, oh, I did research, I looked on primary sources, and they're leaving out a huge gap.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, too, with the proliferation of everybody having a phone in their hand, a phone camera in their hand, now anybody can go to a battlefield and stand in front of a monument. Hey, I'm in front of the 69th Pennsylvania Gettysburg and talk for 2 minutes.
Right.
And it might be good or it might be gibberish, but now I'm a historian.
Exactly.
You know, so there's definite dangers too. And look, I don't mean to be snobby about this. No, but you know, my background is business and finance.
Right.
And you know, I know there's a few people in the history field that are not happy with guys like me who are, well, you know, having some success without the hardcore history educational background. So
Right.
so I don't want to sound like a hypocrite on this, but yeah, you gotta some training, some discipline, some hey, let me check my sources, because now that it's on camera, I'm not footnoting what I'm saying for the next 3 minutes, but there needs to be some level of skill and discipline around it.
So I guess with that being said, as far as we're saying what can be, are you seeing that actually happening more and more? Is that becoming a problem, or is this just, are we preemptively before this?
I won't say it's becoming a problem, but it's out there.
Okay.
It's out there. It's out there. And for me even when Eric and I started the Battle of Gettysburg podcast now 5 or 6 years ago, there were not a lot of Civil War Gettysburg podcasts out there. There were a couple, but there were not a lot. And, now you're seeing more of a proliferation of that. Friends of mine who were not doing this 5 years ago are now podcasting. And so, I think it's just, I have a love-hate relationship with it.
You're right.
I still love books. But I appreciate, look, if you're going to reach people, you got to get on YouTube, and you got to podcast, and you got to do something on social media. And I have a love-hate relationship with it too, because for me, it's at the end of the day, it's one about going to the sites. Don't watch a tour. Well, okay, watch the tour on YouTube, but then go to the site. Yeah, don't watch the tour on YouTube in lieu of going to a site. Unless you have a physical reason why you can't. Go to the sites and read books. And I hope at least during my rapidly diminishing lifetime that doesn't change.
No, for sure.
Right.
So I guess a follow up to that, as far as the availability of research and digitization. My next question is, how have you seen social media change your world? And I want to frame it like the world of history or the world of being a battlefield guide or anything like that. But maybe just make a big umbrella of, how has social media changed the landscape of history in general?
Yeah, I think, a little bit of what I said in the earlier answer, the idea that social media, certainly the ability of everybody now running out with a camera, whether it's a history-based organization like the ABT or just individuals doing it, everybody can be a part of it now. And as we're alluding to, there's good and there's bad there. But I think certainly that's changing the field. I was listening to somebody else's podcast, an academic historian. This is a while ago. I won't say who it was, but he's an academic professor, and he kind of laughed and said, "Oh yeah, everybody thinks they're a historian now." Well, there's a little bit of that. And I will tell you, as a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg, okay, everyone thinks they can be a tour guide kind of thing. So there's good and bad. It's opening doors. It's making it more accessible. I feel like I've just been negative and cynical. So
you're good. Yeah.
Well, let me say something positive. Is we have three younger individuals than me in the room right now. This bemoaning and this teeth gnashing we have about, the history audience is dying out. It's only old people when the gray hairs die. Nobody's going to be into the Civil War anymore. I think in great part because of this digital generation, I'm meeting and, sometimes even making friends with people in their 30s, people in their 40s, dare I say even people in their 20s, who are interested in this. And the digital, the social media aspect of it is introducing it to a generation that isn't going to pick up Edwin Coddington. So that's good, and that's good. And there's no doubt about it that that's a good thing. We are getting younger people into it. They may not be kids, but younger adults, and that's good.
No, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So kind of taking that in the bigger picture, one of the questions it came to my mind, and I'm just curious on what your take is how has your view of history changed your view of modern politics, modern life? Do you find yourself watching the news or whatever your modern way of getting information is and filtering the situation through what you know of history?
Yeah, interesting question. I was, at a different time in life, I was a believer, and I still am a believer. Look, kids today, educationally, you got to be up on math, you got to be up on science, you got to be up on computers, and sometimes social disciplines like history would fall by the wayside. And there was a time in my life where I kind of was like, hey, as much as I love history, that's the way it's got to be, sort of thing. But I think much of the upheaval and nonsense we're dealing with in culture and society and politics today from 2025 in some cases clearly has a basis in people not understanding the history of this country.
Right.
And that's what you get when you neglect history in education. You know, whenever this started to diminish in the 1980s, the 1990s,
Right.
whenever it started to diminish, we're now 30, 40, 50 years down the road from that. So we've raised a generation that in most cases doesn't understand the history of our country, but now they're raising their own kids who have no interest and no idea, and pretty soon it's going to be grandkids, and it's a snowball effect.
Right.
So, you know, there's that aspect of it. The other piece of your question, though, you know, when you give tours of a Civil War battlefield every day, and people say, well, and then you turn on Fox or CNN or whatever at night, and people say, well, you know, the country's never been more divided than it is now.
Right.
And again, let's talk about the 60s, folks, the 1860s.
Exactly.
Right? And but again, that comes back to a lack of understanding that too many people in government, private sector, unemployed, in schools, academia, you name it, they don't get it.
No,
they don't
exactly.
Get it. Yeah.
That's great.
And I think that's part of our problem, folks.
Yeah, right. Well, and I know for me, especially the deeper you are in any topic, I mean, whether it's you're a guy who works on your truck, or you're an auto head or whatever, or a historian, or you like to go out and whatever, we all dive into our hobbies.
Right.
What I find interesting is we always lament, if you know a lot about a certain subject, you always lament that the kids nowadays, or the public in general, should just know more. People should, it would be better if we know more about this. And on the history side of things, and you kind of hinted at this, people say, oh, the kids nowadays, they should be studying this and this and this in school. They should know about these. And in my, I guess, more realistic head, man, there's not enough time. Like,
that's
you can't. And so, because in my head, like when you're first learning history or you're deep diving history, you're like, oh man, I wish I knew this, or I wish my history teacher would have covered this. But then you realize you can multiply that through in the entire American history, let alone world history. You just, in a way, you have to water down history to feed it to kids to enough that they even have any idea what's going on. Yeah. So if you were like king for a day or whatever, like from the school system, how would you balance deciding what to teach? Teach the public.
I think
that's a very hard question.
That's a very hard question, because again, I have no educator background whatsoever. Look, I think there's some things that are obviously important in our history: Rev War, Civil War, civil rights, World War II, 9/11.
Right.
There are certain touchstone moments, that have to be taught, so we appreciate everything this country has gone through. The problem, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm on a social platform here, but you asked the question.
Right.
The problem is, of course, when what is taught in school is agenda driven.
Yes.
Right? The educator, whoever might be, has an agenda, and they're going to filter history through that agenda. If kids are coming through school today and not getting any sort of lesson in 9/11, I might question, why is that? I don't care if you don't have time.
Right.
You know what? We watched the movie today in school instead of a lesson. There are certain things. World War II. How many people are just totally ignorant about World War II? So I think there's these basic things that do have to be taught, but also we all know in some places, and I don't mean to damn everybody with a broad stroke here, but we do know in some places there are agendas being pushed.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's got to be interpretation. And we all filter history through interpretation, but it shouldn't be America bad on everything.
Right.
And there's too much of that, and it's, I think, one of the reasons why society is in trouble.
So, which actually, related or not, brings me to my next question.
Okay, all right.
Let's get into you and Eric starting the Battle of Gettysburg podcast. So, it's a good jump off to, getting the word out there, getting on social media, getting on the modern media. Tell me, I got to know a story. Like, what made you guys start that? What was the genesis? And
5, 6, 7 years ago, we're kind of getting into the dawn of this podcasting thing, right? Talk radio for your phones,
right?
And it became obvious that, hey, there's an opportunity here to do something on the Battle of Gettysburg, because at that time nobody really was. So there were a couple paths here. Eric started down the road of joining the Addressing Gettysburg team. And I should point out, by the way, Eric and I have been friends for a long time, predating it.
Right.
So that our relationship has nothing to do with podcasting. Eric was kind of talking with Addressing Gettysburg about joining that team when they were getting started. I had a friend, John Zervis. He and I would kind of joke, or we'd banter and be like, hey, we should do a podcast. We'd be great, kind of thing. And sort of bantering, but somehow it ended up with me and Eric saying, hey, let's do a podcast. We know each other. We kind of know what each other's hot buttons are.
Right.
You got a northern guy, you got a southern guy. And we had the bond of loving 1980s era pro wrestling. So
that is like the golden thread that goes through
that's
all
kind of like the shtick,
Right.
the thing that we have that nobody else does. Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, TBS, doesn't matter, kind of thing. So we kind of had these things in common, and Eric was kind of like, hey, you want to do this? And at that time, I was writing books. I was working full-time and part-time. I kind of said, well, let's do 5 of these. Nobody's going to listen to this. 100 of our friends will listen to it. But then when that thing took off, we were just, Christ, I guess we gotta stick with it.
Right.
And that was really how, at least for us, the Battle of Gettysburg podcast came together.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will say, I'm going to kind of repeat what I said at lunch or whatever, but I like what you guys do. And as far as, because there's a lot of, there's a billion podcasts out there. So even now I search Civil War podcast or whatever, there are a bunch.
Right.
And in the world, especially in the world of YouTube or podcasting, if you're looking for just good knowledge on your drive to work, whatever, you're looking for, say, a 45-minute, 30-minute, hour-long podcast, but one that just dives into the material, right?
Yeah.
There's we're going to talk about this. There's a lot of other, podcasts that either there's a lot of bantering back and forth, or they don't have the it factor.
Yeah.
It factor of they're academic, they know, they can research, but oh my goodness, they are hard to listen to. So for whatever it's worth, I've said this before, but you guys are my favorite Civil War podcast to listen to, because you joke around. And I think that's the it factor. You joke around enough, but it's not like 3 minutes worth that you're just, oh my goodness.
Fast forward.
Come on, fast forward, skip. All right. Did you feel that at the time? Did you know that? Do you even care about that?
No, we did. We did, and I think hopefully it's where licensed battlefield guide training comes in.
Okay, yeah.
Because again, it's the combination of the depth of knowledge versus what level do you talk to it at? And look, we're not pros at podcasting. Some of that we learned through trial and error.
Right. Yeah.
You listen to the earlier episodes, and there might be a little more, before we figured out how to tighten it up, kind of things. So, some of it's trial and error. But again, we do think, I think, the guide training, depth of knowledge, ability to communicate, I think that marriage plays out well on the podcast for us. Because as you said, some people know the topic and are dry as dust. Other people, are entertaining, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Right.
And we do that. Last but not least, we made a decision early on. Each episode, or sometimes multi-parters, was going to be a deep dive on a specific topic. We were not going to do 20 minutes, hey Eric, where'd you go for ice cream last night? Well, my favorite pizza in the Dobbin house and all that stuff. Let other people do that, and I'm not knocking anybody who does that. I'm not knocking that.
No, yeah. They have that place too.
Yeah, all I'm saying is we decided very early on, our mission is tonight we're going to deep dive on whatever topic, the wheat field or the peach orchard or Sickles, kind of thing. We're going to deep dive on a topic. That's our thing, and 5 years later, we've stuck to that.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, so before we end with the rapid fire, you forgot to answer part of one of my other questions, which was, when you're researching, how do you know when to stop researching?
I hate the word forget. I just didn't get to it.
Right.
Because there is this, I have a lot of friends who love to research. Wayne loves to research. Bob O'Neill loves to research. Right. They may not always enjoy the writing process at all. And so they will willingly research. And as you said before, pursue every rabbit hole that they come across. And in some cases, that is great for your knowledge, but if your objective is to produce a book, you might never get that book out if you don't get out of rabbit holes. For me, I kind of stop when I start to see things over and over. Now, I naturally get impatient because I don't like researching. I don't. And so I naturally get impatient and come on, I want to start writing.
Right.
But once I start seeing the same things over and over, I get this rare account and he says the same thing that account said. Then it's kind of like, okay, I feel like I've gotten enough of the big picture. There's always going to be, oh my God, well, you missed the story of Sergeant whoever. Okay, you got to accept that because it's something like Gettysburg, 160,000 people, there's going to be 160,000 stories to tell. So you got to accept at some point you might not tell every story. But in the big picture, if you have a premise and a thesis, and now you're starting to see the same thing in your research over and over.
That's a good point.
That's when I stop and I start
No, that's a good trigger point of like when you start seeing the same thing over. I mean, I just know like even my own self, just trying to write blogs or even just, you're researching a topic. And I guess my fear is I haven't researched enough because maybe there's that one piece that disproves my thesis. Or because you can't ever prove something doesn't exist because if you never find it, you can just say, "Oh, I just haven't found it yet."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and I just find myself like you could just go forever in researching and to pick on other authors. There's some of them do have a hard time deciding. Like I have a friend of mine who's like, "I've been working on a book for 30 years."
Yeah, exactly. God bless you if you want to do that.
Right.
If you want to tell people, because for some people it's the adventure of, "Oh, I'm working on a book."
Right.
My wife always says, "Oh, everybody we know is working on a book, but nobody, finishes it."
Yeah, exactly.
You got to finish it.
No, it's a common problem.
If that's your objective, finish it. So at some point, it's like, okay, Christ.
Yeah.
All right, I might. Yeah, I'm done. I'm done. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. All right, so we're into some rapid fire questions here.
Right.
Some of them are very cliche.
Okay.
When I say rapid fire, some of them will be quick answers. Others maybe a few sentences.
You might have noticed so far I don't give very short answers.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
So, most common question you get is a battlefield guide.
Where's the bathroom?
That is battle related. How about that?
Changing the conditions.
I know. Qualifiers here.
I don't know if it's the most common, but the one battle related that sticks with me the most is Pickett's charge. People stare across that field, shake their head, and go, "My God, what was Robert E. Lee thinking? He must have been insane."
Right.
That's from a battle perspective, that's a really common one.
All right.
I mean, cliche for me to say, what was Sickles thinking?
Yeah, exactly.
But for more general. Yeah.
All right, so two other related questions.
Okay.
The most pervasive myth out there, and then the one comment that you get that irks you the most. They might be the same, but they could be different. So, biggest pervasive myth out there.
About the Battle of Gettysburg?
About the Battle of Gettysburg.
Some of my colleagues would say that the battle was fought over shoes or things of that nature. I think even for the more learned folks, the myth that George Meade was fired or replaced after the Battle of Gettysburg, that he was fired and replaced by Ulysses Grant, that's a pervasive one. I'll go with that.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And then the one that, it may not be pervasive, but one that when people ask, you're like, oh my goodness, like irks you.
Well, you're asking the wrong guy, right? Because I do all this Sickles stuff, and when I see somebody like, well, Sickles just told George Meade to go to hell,
right?
And I've just spent 25 years of my life trying to suggest that maybe it's a more nuanced story than that. So I do get irked a little bit by that stuff. Yeah.
All right. So Sickles,
sure,
sounds good. All right, favorite Civil War movie.
Well, I don't have many. I will say I will say the movie Gettysburg.
Okay.
Yeah, I will. It's the one I cut my teeth on. Slow as molasses.
Right.
Speechifying until you're ready to gouge your eyes out. But if you want to see the Battle of Gettysburg on a big screen, and I think for my money, people always talked about Chamberlain and Little Round Top and the effect that had. I think that Pickett's charge is still pretty damn good.
It's good.
And to see it on a big screen is, at least as now 30 years later, still the closest.
Well, it's that's the movie that got me to where I am today. As a kid, that got me interested in it.
And for me, as a very young adult, exactly.
All right, here's a tough one. Eastern or Western theater more important?
Oh, Christ, Eastern.
You gotta get hang
right? My friend Phil Spoggy is watching for that one.
Right.
Ohio.
So elaborate on that. Why do you think Eastern was more important?
I just think, the press, the media attention, the coverage, it's Grant versus Lee, the big stars of the East. Look, and all joking aside, I am not, I'm not diminishing the importance of the Western theater. But there's clearly a reason why our ancestors and forefathers emphasized the Eastern theater. And sometimes, you can revise history up to a point, but if the people who were there felt this was about the East, then damn it, this was about the East.
That's awesome.
Or because I live in Gettysburg, I work in Gettysburg.
Right.
Either one.
All right. Most underrated battlefield?
I don't know. I think...
Of course, there's a bunch I don't even know about.
Exactly.
That's kind of a hard one because there's a lot I don't even know about.
Yeah. Let me answer that by saying, in recent years, I've become more and more of a Chancellorsville enthusiast.
Ooh.
And, underrated.
Yeah.
So we think of Chancellorsville, we think of Jackson getting shot. And that's all we think about. Underrated in terms of first day, second day, third day at Chancellorsville.
Right.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, so I'll pick Chancellorsville from that perspective. And one more piece to that answer, if you just study Robert E. Lee through the prism of Gettysburg, you don't get Robert E. Lee. I would argue, look at Robert E. Lee at Chancellorsville. Again, the audacity, the maneuvering, the cliche of dividing your army, but the audacity and the maneuvering of that is Robert E. Lee.
Yeah.
So I'll say Chancellorsville.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Civil War figure you would like to share a campfire with?
Like, are we talking like a bunk? Wait, like
snuggling? Maybe not snuggling.
What kind of podcast is this?
How about dinner? You go to dinner with
All right, we can go to dinner with them. It really would be a toss-up between Custer and Sickles.
Right.
Custer is my childhood and still an adult, man crush kind of thing.
Right.
As long as I could ask Custer about Little Bighorn and not limit it to Civil War.
Yeah.
But having said that, now I've spent professionally 15 of the last 25 years, 20 of the last 25 years devoted to Dan Sickles. And of course, at this point, there'd be a million, Dan, tell me the truth. What were you thinking kind of thing. So toss it up and either one of those two guys.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Best place, the one place in Gettysburg that still, for lack of a better phrase, moves you or that you are awe-inspired or that you just like to go to and just...
That you kind of feel in your plums, feel in your plums kind of thing. I think, I think the beauty of this and of a big battlefield like a Gettysburg is it can change over the years.
Yes, for
right?
sure.
It can change. Things that interested me 25 years ago interest me less 25 years later. But I think, so I'll say, having devoted so much of my work to the Peach Orchard or Peach Orchard related topics, I still feel like it's an underrated part of the battlefield. To many of the people, the second day is still Devil's Den, Little Round Top, Wheatfield.
Right.
July 2nd and July 3rd are fought in large parts the way they're fought because of the Peach Orchard. Yeah. And I still can get up there and someday look at that view towards Cemetery Ridge and say, damn, that's the Peach Orchard.
There's a lot that happened there on all 3 days. It's just...
Well, that's exactly it. And obviously Sickles' move there influences the second day, but what a lot of people don't appreciate is Lee and Longstreet's capture of that position influences Lee on the third day.
Yeah.
And so many people don't realize that or appreciate that.
I think in Wittenberg's book, I think Buford's cavalry camped at the Peach Orchard on the night of the 1st.
It did, yeah.
Some of them, yeah.
Some of them are bivouacking in and around the Peach Orchard, absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. And don't we all love John Buford?
Oh, of course.
All you movie guys, yeah.
Anyone with that actor playing, you gotta love him.
Exactly, so. Sam Elliott, Buford, yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for doing it, and I guess...
From Gettysburg to Wyoming.
I know, big gap there.
Yeah.
So,
well, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate
Definitely.
all the hospitality you've shown me this weekend for the Lest We Forget project.
You betcha.
At the Fort Casper Cemetery. Super important project, folks. Look it up online and something I hope more people will become aware of and contribute to.
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching. And, of course, until we see you next time, ride hard.